It's a new year, and in 2025, I'd like to draw your attention to some cool new and classic designs over on my shop. It helps the channel. And we're live. I just cut that t-shirt part out because I don't have a shop anymore. I'll get into that later on. I want to first thank everyone who is here, whether you're watching on X, YouTube, DLive, Facebook, wherever you're watching from. Welcome to the channel. It's been a while since I've had a live stream, and today I've brought on a very, what I believe, interesting guest, a lady that I've met. I think I've known you for a few years now. I've met several times in London when I was there. I think I saw you the last time I saw you was in June. Does that sound about right, Claire?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just give a brief introduction to Claire for those of you who don't know her. And then I'll ask her to introduce herself, and we'll get into the meat of her ideas. So as I remember, Claire, talking to you, you are, well, I'll let you describe your family or where you're from, but you don't have any Muslim family members, but you do advocate for a system that incorporates Quranic principles of governance, but intended for non-Muslim societies. Does that sound correct?
Yes, absolutely. I created secular Quranist for
Exactly.
the Westerners, really.
And you argue basically that Western societies have become degenerate matriarchies and that they need a patriarchal legal framework to restore our civilizations, support marriage, good governance, all of those sort of things. And basically it allows secular Koranism is, as I remember through our conversations, it guarantees freedom of belief, but draws solely on the Quran and excludes other Islamic texts like the Hadiths. And for those of you that are not aware, the Quran and the Hadiths are two separate parts of Islamic tradition. Most of the Islamic Sharia law is based on the four trusted Hadiths. And this is where you get into a lot of the questionable actions and moral character of Allah's apostle Muhammad and his behaviors here on earth 1400 years ago, where a lot of people have issues with those things. A lot of people think that it's contradictory, it's impractical, especially given that a lot of Western people recoil at just even the thought of submitting to Islam. So I think those are basically some of the topics we'll be going through and where you get it. Would you like to maybe introduce yourself? I don't know, you could tell as much as you'd like about yourself or as little as you'd like, and perhaps maybe you can either correct me where I was wrong in that little blurb or maybe add to it.
No, nothing wrong about what you said. Basically, I'm a political theorist, and having lived in the UK for more than half my life, I'm concerned about the concerns of people who are not happy with their government. And I've always thought, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? And obviously, I had no idea that there was so much psychology required to understand the problems of Westerners, which I think is basically the failure of Christianity, in the sense that most Westerners are not Christian and don't believe in God. And I think Westerners are basically as godless as the Chinese, but actually a lot of Chinese people want to believe in God, and this gives me hope, because people basically want to they believe what they want to believe, and it is just a matter of changing minds, putting a spin on things, and yes, it's that sort of thing, really.
Okay. A little bit about your background. You're not Muslim yourself, and as far as I know, talking to you about your early life, you never had any Muslim family members. You didn't grow up as a Muslim. So this is not something that you've taken from either your family or from other parts.
Not at all. I was once an Islamophobe, like most people. I did grow up in a Muslim country, but in I guess, non-Muslim majority part of Malaysia. I would say it's a pretty good country compared to, say, Singapore or Thailand. I think it's just a sort of happy medium between being reasonably free, but not so free as to be like Thailand, for example.
So you think Thailand is just completely off the rails?
Oh, well, yes, I think, Buddhism is a religion that is more or less a personal ethical code. So it's not really suitable to be, used as a guide for laws for society. And so I think people bend with the wind. And I think that is a problem. And obviously, Buddhist countries are not too impressive if you think of Thailand or Sri Lanka or Tibet.
Well, okay, but this does your Quran, because I do see some people in the chat thinking that this will basically enable an Islamic caliphate within a couple generations, or it's that you're ultimately anti-European. Actually, that is, as far as I understand, having talked to you, not the case. And we'll get into that later on how Claire believes that the demographic nosedive that's taking place in Western countries could and can be reversed. Whether or not it is possible is another story altogether, but we will get into that later. Now, let's see. I'm gonna ask you some questions on this, Claire. Let's see. How do you? I don't know. What role did your interactions with Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, Taoist, Muslim communities play in your shaping of secular Koranism?
I read the Quran in 2006, and it was something I'd meant to do after 9/11, but I actually was a bit slow on the uptake. I was actually delighted to discover that it was a relatively liberal document, supporting my solutions, such as a one-party state, dealing with feminism, that sort of thing, and having the authority that obviously I, as an individual, do not have about the things I want to do, and I think the real difference between their kind of Islam and their kind of Sharia and my interpretation of it is that I dispense with the Hadith, and that's where you get all the nasty stuff, the stonings, the executions, and forbidding music, and all kinds of things that actually are not in the Quran, but which normative Muslims are very attached to.
No, I agree. I mean, I remember reading recently, I think just in the last couple of months, that the age of marriage has been dropped to 9 years of age in Iraq. It already is in many other countries, and it's based on the Bukhari Hadiths and the marriage because Muhammad was considered to be the ultimate and the most emulatable man that's ever existed. And he did in his 50s marry Abu Bakr, the first caliph or caliph, depending on how you pronounce it. After his death, he married his daughter at the age of 6 and consummated that marriage at the age of 9. And this is also where you get the idea of what is called muktafathat, or thighing, and the use of Muslim men of even to the age of toddlers, their inner thighs to satisfy their urges. And these things, as Claire is very clear, these don't come from the Quran. And I have read the Quran myself, and I'm not I guess I'm not as attached to it as you are, but I would back up Claire's assertion that these aspects that Western people recoil at, stonings, beheadings, child marriage, these sorts of things, they're not included in the Quran. So these are separate books written after the death of Muhammad that recount his actions, the actions of the apostle of Allah. So I would agree with that with Claire. But Now, Claire, how did your Taoist Buddhist background influence your agnostic approach to the Quran? Because as you were just saying, Chinese people, you know, they're pretty godless, as you stated, and I'd probably agree with that for the most part. Most Chinese I've met as well are. How did your Taoist and Buddhist upbringing and your agnostic influence? Yeah, excuse me. How did it influence your agnostic approach to the Quran?
Well, being legally trained, I suppose I see problems as being soluble through the change, a change in law, and I think most political activism is about changing laws or changing the entire system, and because that is the only way to change people's behavior when reward some behaviors and punish others. And we seem to have gone the opposite way about rewarding behaviors that are in fact undesirable and punishing behaviors that are in fact desirable. I think maybe some of you might agree with me.
I would agree to a certain extent, and I should just address a couple of things in the chat. I'm not converting to Islam. I am a Christian, so and I don't intend. Yeah, I know, but I don't intend to ever convert to anything other than what I am, and that is Christian. So I just want to address that in the chat. Also, Claire, when this is finished, you should go back. There's a couple of people that would like to. They're saying if you see some of these messages to contact them, they want to talk to you about certain things. Just so I don't forget before that's done. Okay, let me give you another question. How would you balance promoting a Quranic system while remaining agnostic?
Well, okay, my position is that the First Amendment is supported by Chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, and it says there is no compulsion in belief. Truth stands clear from error. And that is the only holy book in the world that actually mentions freedom of belief and freedom of expression. And it asserts the right of people to express incorrect opinions because they can be easily shown to be wrong by, cleverer, more learned people than ourselves. And I think this is how it should be. We can say foolish things like, I believe the sun goes around the earth, and all kinds of silly things, and scientific opinion will prove us wrong, and this is all that needs to be asserted. And obviously people want to believe in their silly nonsense. You can't stop them, but they have to obey the law. And that, I think, is the basis of this system. It says you can't make people agree with you even when they're obviously wrong, but as long as they don't do things that clearly hurt society, like murder and rob and rape, you have to allow them the right to be wrong.
So now this gets into a tricky area, because you are, as you said, you're from Malaysia. So I'm not leaking any of these things. I won't say exactly where you're from, but I've been to your hometown, and I've said to you several times when I met you in London, I can't believe that you'd prefer to live in London than your hometown, because your hometown is a lot nicer and it has a lot better food and it's a lot sunnier. It's a very nice place. There's actually a lot of, as far as I know, a lot of Australian expats and retirees living there because it is such a nice place and has a very good sort of standard of living for the cost. Like your dollar goes a lot further.
Mm-hmm.
But my question would then be, most Islamic countries, and even in Indonesia and Malaysia, which I've lived in Indonesia, you still have you could use the expression Islam light, in the sense that it's not as extreme as Pakistan, Afghanistan, and many of the other stands, or in the Arab world. And but even in those countries, you still have to, even on your IDs, your state IDs, you have to have your professed religion on them. And especially women, Muslim women in those countries, they are not allowed to convert out of Islam. Non-Muslim women can marry Muslim men, but non-Muslim men cannot marry Muslim women. You still already have, even in the most tame Islamic states like Indonesia, like Malaysia, you still have a sense of the authoritarian nature of Islam, or the glory of Islam, if you'd like. So how would you, in this belief system, you claim that secular Koranism would guarantee freedom of belief, but how would this work in practice, given the idea that you have these belief systems that are based on the teachings of Islam?
Yes, that restriction is actually in the Quran, and the reason is that Muslim women have to marry Muslim men, because if a woman were to marry, a Jew or a Christian, the fact that he is supposed to be above her and a protector and provider will make her eventually change her religion to suit his preferences. But it's okay the other way around, because if you're a Muslim man, you are actually allowed to marry Jewesses and Christian women, maybe up to 4 of them, if you're capable of coping with all that. So this is just the presumption that a man in proper control of his own household should have no fear of his women if they want to go to their synagogue or church.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you understand, though, how would it work in practice, though, your claim that it would guarantee freedom of belief, though? Because no matter where Islam does dominate, freedom of freedom of belief is not permitted. Even in parts of the country you're living in right now, the United Kingdom, there are areas of that country that are under Sharia control that do not allow for freedom of belief.
Yes, I mean, the thing about the First Amendment is actually quite a lot of Americans don't get it either, and allow their rights to be infringed without even noticing it. Maybe this is a sort of lawyerly thing that people like me are obsessed about these things only notice. I mean, I would say affirmative action is actually an infringement of the First Amendment, in that it requires people to believe that feminism is true, and therefore men and women should have equal rights. But it has been said, I believe, by Aristotle that it can be the greatest injustice to treat unequal things equally. And obviously, men and women are not equally good at giving birth, and men and women are not equally good at being soldiers. That's an example that comes to mind.
Okay. Well, then how then does secular Koranism, and I'd like you to explain this, how would your understanding of your concepts of secular Koranism, how would they differ from traditional Islamic Sharia?
Well, I do have my own method of interpretation, which these normative Muslims would be jumping up and down and saying, it can't ever be so. That there would be a flat rate income tax of 20%. There would be licensed brothels in red light districts, because the verse actually says, "Do not compel your slave girls into prostitution if they wish to remain chaste." And my interpretation of that is, if you do not compel them, then it's okay. And if a slave girl can choose to be a prostitute, all the more can a free woman. And obviously, prostitution has a social purpose, because not every man will be able to find a wife.
Oh, well, I would agree with that, especially given in countries like, especially China, for example, where it's got somewhere in the area of around 35 million extra men based on the one-child policy and systemic infanticide of their girls. So I do agree with that. But you did bring up an interesting point about the slave girls, and slavery is very much permitted in Islam. Even in the retinue of the Queen Elizabeth's coronation in 52, 53, maybe Chad can help me out what year exactly it was. But even in the retinue of some of the sultans and the King of Saudi Arabia, They did bring slaves, including eunuch slaves. And in Mauritania, they've tried to stamp it out. I think the last time they tried to stamp it out was 2014. And even the first sort of expedition of the United States, for example, and it's part of the battle hymn of the U.S. Marine Corps. The very beginning of it is from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And Tripoli was one of the first foreign expeditions of the United States military, and it was because their merchants and their merchant fleet was constantly being seized by Barbary pirates. And when they asked, why are you attacking us? We haven't done anything to you. Why are you enslaving our people? And they said, well, because the Quran allows it. Islam allows it. Muhammad himself as a person, he bought, sold, traded, and gifted slaves. He enslaved women. He enslaved all manner of people. And thus, like, slavery has had to be forced to the margins within Islamic societies, but it still has not been thoroughly eradicated. I've even seen, for example, Kuwaiti politicians talking about during the civil war, and I wouldn't even call it a civil war in Syria, especially during the period of ISIS, during the liquidation of the religious minorities in that country and the taking of slave girls, and how this was absolutely and consistent with Islamic values, and the basically using them for sexual purposes. How would you adjust that? I mean, would slavery and sexual slavery be permitted under secular Koranism?
Well, I have to go by the book, and basically neither the Bible nor the Quran forbid slavery. And this suggests to me that God, if he exists, considers slavery to be an institution because it has its own, social purposes. I mean, if you're going to look at it dispassionately, slavery was what made America great, because without indentured servitude, those starving Irish peasants would never have been able to get across the Atlantic. So they sold themselves into indentured servitude, and this was basically what a coolie was. But when the Chinese do it, it's called being a coolie. But lots of people who are now in America got across the Atlantic by pledging their services to whoever was paying their fare, and then when they got to the other side of the Atlantic, they would work for, I guess, however many years they promised, and then after that they were allowed to seek their fortune after making a few contacts and knowing what's what. So that was really how it worked. I mean,
yeah, but Claire, let's be honest, that is very different from, for example, Muhammad's own example of after the Battle of the Trench, slaughtering every single member of the Jewish community in Medina and sexually enslaving all. I mean, they even have in the Hadiths, they talk about basically checking the genitalia of the boys, and if they had one hair, they would chop their heads off. And the boys were sold into slavery. The girls were all taken as sex slaves. And this systematically has been part of Islamic culture till the current year. And that is a very different thing than paying off your debts through indentured servitude of a couple of years, where basically an Islamic society comes in, slaughters all of your men, and enslaves all of your women. Do you not see the difference between those two things?
Well, it's a convention of war to, if you win, you slaughter the men and you take the women and children as slaves. And, women have always been part of booty. And if you go back to, say, Trojan Women by Euripides, you will hear a dialogue between the Queen Hecuba, who was a widow of King Priam. The Greeks had obviously entered the fortress of Troy, and they were getting themselves ready to be shipped off to various Greek states as slaves. And Queen Hecuba was saying that she'd probably have to be a nanny. because that was how things worked, way back before Islam was even invented. I mean, that was really a convention of war, to slaughter the men and to take the women as booty.
No, I would agree with you. Throughout human history, I mean, it was only, I believe, in somewhere like 1832 where the British worked to eradicate the transatlantic slave trade, and they set up something called the West African Squadron. Interestingly enough, the money that was borrowed from the state to pay that for the West African fleet, and it was used to interdict slave ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean to North and South America, which was borne by the British taxpayer all the way up to, I believe, something along the lines of 2015. So if you are from the United Kingdom listening to this, you actually did pay taxes to abolish slavery, and it was up until that point there was no sort of I would agree with you, there was no moral compunction in any human society not to enslave others, especially after war making. But we have, I believe, as a society, come to a point where we don't agree that the enslavement of other people is somewhere that as a people we want to go. I mean, this could be the results of modern mechanization, the Industrial Revolution. It could be, there have been many papers that have been done talking about why the Roman Empire basically stagnated in terms of its scientific expansion, and a lot of it had to do with slavery. They didn't need any sort of new revelations through mechanization or any others, because they had what they needed to build what they wanted, right? And also free people. It's been also shown that free people work harder than enslaved people. So I don't want to get stuck on this, but go ahead. We'll give me your answer on that. We'll move on from this because we kind of got stuck here in a rut. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, it's a big subject. So basically, the Romans had manumission, which the Greeks did not, and yes, the Roman Empire destroyed itself because it destroyed its own working class. Because the people who had money preferred to deal with slaves because they were cheaper than paying for free labor, and therefore the proletariat in Rome were entertained with bread and circuses, and they declined and became, well, fundamentally useless. They could only be entertained. They refused to join the army, the Roman army, and the Roman Empire was forced to rely on mercenaries. And when you pay your mercenaries, you're actually, well, creating a rod for your own back, because once you give them the money and the arms, they might not necessarily do what you want. Perhaps use your money and the weaponry you gave them against you. So not a good idea. But this is a demographic problem which I see happening in the West now as we speak.
Okay, well let's use that as our segue. You were talking about the demographic problems in the West, and I don't think anyone would disagree with you in that respect. I think that we've in Western nations, because of there's multiple. I've done videos on this for 10 years. I mean, if you guys don't know my positions on these things or my thoughts, maybe go back and take a look. You probably won't find anything on YouTube. Everything's been scrubbed. You can find links in the description here for my Odyssey channel and my BitChute channels. Those two would be probably, they have more of my back catalog. So if anyone's interested in that, but there is a serious problem. The Western world is outsourcing its baby making, and at the same time doing so by mass, unrelenting, demographically transformative immigration into a country, and bringing, for the most part, people that are very, very culturally different, and it's causing a lot of problems. The country you're in right now, the United Kingdom, it looks as though it's going to blow at any moment over these problems that they're having with these hotels and the crimes that are being committed. I see videos on Twitter almost daily, and multiple ones of people that are just being fed up, and they're coming up with new laws, and they're coming up with new draconian ways in which to suppress any kind of dissent on that. And these are serious problems. Demographics are causing serious problems. I mean, you're having the same problems in places like Japan and China, but their responses have not been, completely to try to transform their population. So people are saying, oh, well, they're doomed because they're not, bringing in. But the funny part is that they're also talking about it at the same time. And it's Larry Fink, the guy that heads up BlackRock. He's done a complete 180-degree turn, saying that we need more immigration, to now countries that have restricted immigration and reducing population, or populations that are reducing, will probably be the winners going forward, especially given the AI and robotics revolution that we're already seeing the sort of event horizon of. So you were talking about the demographic issue, and that was something that people were talking about at the very beginning in the chat, on how they just see you as an anti-European charlatan that's trying to basically, through Koranism, trying to bring about an Islamic caliphate. So the question, first of all, would be, how could secular Koranism address the demographic spiral that Western countries are in right now?
Well, as I see it, all the religions we've heard of is about frightening women of childbearing age and men of fighting age into marrying each other and having legitimate children and staying together for the sake of the children. That is basically the very least your religion should be doing for you. And if your religion doesn't do that, then there's going to be, problems along the line. And what I'm proposing is basically let's make people marry younger by forbidding. Well, okay, I won't be forbidding premarital sex, but I will be punishing unmarried parents who have children without a marriage license. And that's the only way to make it clear. You privilege married parents over non-parents, and you treat unmarried parents as sex offenders. And I guess everybody's going to scream at me now, but I just don't see how else it's going to,
What kind of punishment would
behavior.
you have? I mean, we already have a system, I would agree with you, that is absolutely dysgenic, especially in Western countries, that reward unmarried parents with just lavish state largesse in terms of welfare, housing. In the United States, they call it Section 8 housing, and they call it food stamps, or EBT, I believe it's called. In the UK, they call it council estates. There's different words for it in different countries, but it's all the same thing. So I'd agree with you. But what would punishments be for unmarried people?
It's in chapter 24, verse 2. It's 100 lashes per illegitimate offspring, corporal punishment. I guess in the village green or the town square or the shopping mall. I don't know, but just this would discourage, the fear of this would discourage people. But obviously, I'm not going to be, having retrospective legislation and punishing people who are already unmarried parents. There would be a year's grace. So nobody after a year has elapsed are going to say, oh, we didn't know. And, when we had sex, we didn't know it's going to be a crime. I'm, prepared to be, very, very generous and very liberal about it. But after the year, a year's grace has passed, these punishments would have to fall on people found guilty of them.
Okay, well, I mean, we did have a system in place up till, I would imagine, even the 1970s, where if you got a girl pregnant, that girl's father would come over and talk to your father and saying, hey, bro, your son's marrying my daughter, even if they were 17, 18. I mean, it's very, very, very common. But the problem is that we had a defined homogenous society with social expectations, and we also had societal shame. So I'm not really sure if bringing people out to the village green would would be acceptable in Western societies. Maybe perhaps limiting state handouts. Let's just say I don't think a lot of people would agree with that. I think this is where I think some of your critics start to engage with the idea that you have authoritarian sort of predilections, perhaps.
I'm just going by the book, Felix. I'm really just going by the book. It does allow this punishment, and I just don't see what else is going to change people's behavior. If you say you won't get benefits if you do X, Y, and Z, people don't think that far in advance. They will do whatever they feel like, and worry about the consequences later.
Well, hold on. That's not true, and I can give you a very good example of that. And probably, I don't know what Malaysia is like, but in Japan, for example, there really is no social safety net whatsoever here. There you have subsidized medical care, you have unemployment insurance if you lose your job, and there are programs for people that are mentally and physically disabled, and you also have old age pension. But if you're of working age and you're not working, you starve. And because of that, I mean, there's a lot. This is also causing the same. The problem is this problem is the same in Japan, and in the sense that they're not having enough children, same as the West. But it does create a system where people are more socially responsible because there is no safety net for them. I've seen just in the UK, you have drug addicts, you have all manner of just cretinous people, I guess, that live in abject luxury, in relative terms, by basically being, again, taking largesse from the state. So you do have, I mean, the United Kingdom, before the great social plan of turning it into a socialist Marxist state that it is today. I mean, you look at pictures from 100 years ago, you see street urchins and all manner of social decay, but it did, in certain respects, form a society that worked better than the one that we have today. So I don't know.
It's bad in China too. I don't know if you read that in Sichuan province, which is a major province of China, the Chinese are lifting the. I think it's something to do with registering their birth. They're saying they're not going to discriminate against unmarried mothers in Sichuan province. So this means China's gonna go the same way as the West, because once Sichuan province goes, the others will as well. Because if you're not having enough children, you're going to be happy that any are born at all.
I actually made a video on that. If anybody's interested, I made a video on that last week. Exactly what Claire's talking about. I also some of the things that Claire hasn't addressed is that they're also going to make it pretty much impossible for women to get an abortion after 14 weeks without the consent of 3 separate doctors, pretty much eliminating abortion in China as a means of gratuitous birth control. They're also going to be paying mothers. I can't remember how much it was. The video's out. It's called, it's easy to find. It's got a Chinese woman on the front, and it's something about turning Chinese women into baby making machines. If you haven't watched it, just go to my channel's catalog. It's from last week. Yeah, perhaps you're right. But and I should also say at this venture, if anybody wants to ask Claire some questions, you can get your super chats in, and I will be asking them at the end. And we're going to go for probably an hour and 15 minutes. We're at the 40-minute mark right now. So if you want to ask Claire any questions, we will read those questions at the end. So get those in if you're interested. Claire, how would secular Koranism treat blasphemy? Blasphemy within the confines of Islam, as I can tell, is that within the confines of Islam, it is a religion that death, comments that are seen as even slightly not in line with the almost, I don't want to say worship, but the adulation of the Prophet Muhammad and Islam itself, you will see riots and people being killed. So how would secular Koranism deal with blasphemy?
It was actually a Pakistani Muslim man who told me that there is no mention of blasphemy at all in the entire Quran. And then I asked him, what about the blasphemy laws in Pakistan then? And you know, the case of Asia Bibi, I think her name was, who was a Christian woman, and they were going to execute her. And he said, well, it's a hangover from British rule. It was the British who gave us our blasphemy laws. And he would be right. I mean, there's actually a verse in the Quran, chapter 17, verse 111, that says words to the effect of, Allah does not need laws to protect his feelings. And again, I cite chapter 2, verse 256, which I say is basis for the First Amendment, protecting our freedom of belief and our freedom of expression. So under secular Koranism, the First Amendment would be uncompromisingly supported.
Okay.
And the Muslims will not like this, but they can't deny that either.
Right.
That I mean, these verses exist.
Okay. But how would you do you think, this is just another question, do you think that using the word Koranism is kind of counterproductive, given the fact that so many Western people have, I guess because of a lot of the authority, let's just say the Quran isn't any of these things that people perceive it to be, but they watch the news, they see the threats, they see the problems that are manifesting within their own cities. Do you think that using the word in a project or in a ideology that you propound isn't somewhat counterproductive?
Well, you're not the first person who said that. Some people have said, you know, I might consider it if you change that horrible name. And my answer is that, well, the cat's out of the bag now. And even if I pretended it was all my wonderful original ideas, people would know that it was based on the Quran. And even if they didn't know that before, people will just say to me, you know, it's just your idea. It's just your opinion. Why should we listen to you? You're just, you know, a silly woman with cranky ideas. So I'm, you know, I think it's actually quite useful for me to say, well, God, if he exists, agrees with me.
Okay. All right. I mean, it seems all right. But again, do you not see the word as counterproductive, Quranic?
Well, I think,
Like
you know,
Koranism.
if we're going to accept correction, and the correction is basically that Europeans have basically, since the American Revolution, left Christianity behind, because okay, the American Revolution was completely unprecedented because, you know, nobody ever said, oh, I'm going to start a nation and the rules are going to be, you know, in this constitution. It was all in Europe. It was basically absolute monarchs claiming the divine right to rule, you know, making up the rules as they go along. So nobody had any rights at all. And the whole idea of liberalism and human rights actually came from the American Revolution. And because they started this idea of separating the church from the state, you know, it caused the French Revolution, and in turn caused the entire Russian royal family to be exterminated. So, you know, Western history has been a series of revolutions, of republican revolutions, displacing the age of absolute monarchy. And thankfully, it's now extinct in Europe, but not in the Gulf kingdoms. So the Muslims haven't really got the idea yet of becoming a properly constituted republic. because of the absolute monarchies in the Gulf kingdoms. But they've forgotten their own rules, because the Sunnis would talk about the four rightly guided caliphs, with the implication that all the subsequent ones have not been rightly guided, and that's why the Ottoman Empire crashed and burnt in 1922.
Yeah, but the reason for the four caliphs, as far as I understand, is they were all alive during the time of Muhammad. As I stated earlier, the first caliph, Abu Bakr, was the father, and basically is believed to be the first convert to Islam, basically Muhammad's right-hand man, and was the man that gave his child in marriage to Muhammad after, I don't know how many, I think he had 11 wives at the time. And but they were the ones that were alive during the time. And people who aren't familiar with Islam, the difference between Sunni and Shia was the split between who should lead the Islamic community after the death of Muhammad, because even though he was having regular conversations with Allah, he didn't see his own death coming and died without any real successor or any plans for the transition, which I find interesting, even though he had a sort of one-way connection through the Archangel Gabriel to Allah. He didn't see his own death coming. Allah didn't tell him, and what you had was a power struggle. So this is why you have Shia Islam and you have Sunni Islam, and as you were saying, the four caliphs. I'm just trying to give people some context who aren't really familiar with a lot of this. Okay, well let's ask you some more questions.
Could I just point out?
Go ahead.
Quickly, that the four rightly guided caliphs were not related to each other, and that's basically the main thing to understand. A caliph cannot be a king, and if they become a king, then they become an absolute monarch, and then all Islamic scholars under an absolute monarch would fear for their lives. And I know Saudis who tell me that their Islamic scholars are often thrown in jail and sometimes have a death penalty hanging over them, because Mohammed bin Salman is an absolute monarch.
Oh, and also the Saudis are and Wahhabism. Wahhabism is as you know, seen by a lot of Muslim scholars as a heretical branch of Islam. I mean, these people, if they could, I should say this, like they have been going through Saudi Arabia and just bulldozing sites throughout the country that are related to the first days of Islam, Muhammad, his companions, and his wives and whatnot. If they could, they probably would demolish Muhammad's tomb and take his bones and scatter them somewhere out in the desert. But obviously, I think they realize the entire Islamic world would just probably move in and kill them all. So no, I understand that's the problem with Islam, or depending on how you see it, is there is no governing structure as you have in Catholicism with the Vatican, for example. So you've got, people talk about Christianity being all over the place, whereas Islam, I mean, any Islamic scholar can issue fatwas. I mean, this goes to Salman Rushdie, for example, who was just not recently, but in the last couple of years was attacked and almost died because of a book he wrote in, what was it, the 1980s, the late 1980s.
Yes, I think what was most offensive to Muslims was that he wrote about some brothel, and all the women in there have the names of the Prophet's wives. And
okay, but he also the name of the book was the Satanic Verses, and the Satanic Verses were parts of the Quran where when Muhammad, there's a whole bunch of them, but one of the ones I can remember is when he sacked Mecca. I think the only idol that was left, they wanted to destroy most of them, and Muhammad said, okay, well, we can make a deal where your gods will become sort of demigods that serve, or a demigod in a Christian's parlance would be an angels that serve the one true God, Allah. And he agreed with it. And his own people came and said, what's going on here, Mo? you said there was only one God and Allah is him, and there's no other than Allah. And he said, oh, hold on a second. That wasn't Gabriel talking to me. That was Satan. And there was a whole slew of these, and these were known as what are called the satanic verses. And they basically, that is the name of the Salman Rushdie book. A lot of Muslims don't even know about this. It's almost like secretive information that there was a time when Muhammad was supposedly, because of, and you have a lot of that happening in the Quran as well. You have, Muhammad will say something and then contradicts himself later on.
But they're not included in the Quran, are they?
Well, this is my point.
Verses.
Oh, no, they're not. The Satan verses are not. They've been removed. But you do. Okay, for example, killing somebody over a literary work is I think where a lot of Western people pretty much get their hackles up. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I mean, think of Paul William Tyndale. All he was trying to do was translate the Bible into English, and Henry VIII executed him for disagreeing with a few words or translating it in the wrong English with the wrong English words or something. I mean,
but we're talking about a 500-year time span difference there, right?
But yes, words are ideas. Ideas can be political, and people do get executed for blasphemy in those days. So
okay, all right, yeah. I got it. All right, guys. Let's like I said, if you have any questions for Claire, we're going to be wrapping up in probably about 15-20 minutes. I don't want to make this too much more than an hour, because people get tired of listening to anything longer than that. A couple questions. Let's see. I guess you were talking about why do some Muslims find secular Koranism? So we were just talking about the offense that Muslims take that can sometimes end in tragic circumstances. Why do some Muslims find secular Koranism offensive to their faith?
Well, because I a non-Muslim and a non-man, I guess, dare to interpret their Quran. But the thing is, even amongst normative Muslims, they don't agree with each other about the interpretation. That's why they have, more than one school of Sharia. And if they're going to say, on the one hand, the Quran is for all of humanity, and then say, oh, but Claire, you can't read it and you can't have your own interpretation, they would be contradicting themselves. But obviously, implicit in secular Quranism is me saying that this interpretation would be better for Westerners than your kind of Sharia. So of course they don't like that.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess the same critics would say that your vision is a dystopian theocracy. What would be your rebuttal to that?
Well, I actually, with my streaming partner, Vincent Bruno, created a document center called Secular Quranism, one word, .blogspot.com. And it's basically a virtual America governed by the principles of secular Quranism. And actually, we had great fun doing it. And the sort of sitcoms and short stories and, pamphlets explaining various ideas and how things would work, divorce, brothels, slavery, all kinds of fun things. So I hope people will have a look. I mean, it's only the equivalent of maybe 3 A4 pages of double line spacing, I would say. So short and sweet. I hope people will go and look at it. Okay.
Let's take a look at, for example, modern conservatism. I'm not sure if you could say that it's similar in the UK as it is in the United States and also Western Europe. I don't know if it even exists in countries like Canada or Australia. I bet, and if it does, I'd like to see proof of that. But let's just say it does. For example, how would success how would you envision the adoption of secular Koranism, and where would it align with and where would it diverge from Western conservative values? And I'm saying that probably in just Anglo America and the UK.
I'm so glad you mentioned conservatism because, as you were saying yourself, what does it mean? What are its principles? And we have no answer. Roger Scruton, the supposedly conservative thinker, lived and died without explaining what exactly conservatism was supposed to conserve. So, if we mean by conservatism social conservatism, meaning no sex outside marriage, this has gone out of the window entirely since, I guess, the swinging 60s. And in Britain, gay marriage was legalized by David Cameron, the Conservative Prime Minister. So in Britain, it means gay marriage. So it's all over the place. And I think it's because genuine social conservatism can only be imposed by religion. And since most Westerners do not really believe in Christianity, it's going to be very hard to enforce.
Well, okay. How would secular Koranism, how would you envision it addressing global issues like Islamic terrorism?
Well, I would say Islamic terrorism is a response to the provocation of neoconservatism, which is basically about invading Muslim countries, stealing their oil, bombing their countries, destroying them, and then shipping these Muslims over to the West as cheap labor, and then complaining when, occasionally one or two or three of them go crazy and commit acts of terrorism. But that has been the business model of neoconservatism for quite a while now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would take issue with your idea that I'm not sure if that they're bombing these countries in the Middle East for their oil as much as they are in support of a small state in the region and its geopolitical aspirations, something that we're seeing right now. And with regards to shipping them into the West as cheap labor, over 50% of these people and probably 90% of the women, they don't work. They live off state handouts. So I'm not sure if that would be. I would just sort of push back on that assertion and that characterization. But that that's fine. I mean, that's where we go. Again, we're gonna probably finish up in about 10 minutes. Everyone, if you have any questions, get them in now. Otherwise, we'll probably wrap it up, as I said, in about 10 minutes. How would you were talking about one of the things about secular Koranism earlier on in our conversation? You were saying that you'd incentivize people to marry younger. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you were talking about, unmarried parents getting the lash in the village green. But okay, fine. We talked about that. But how would your framework encourage younger people to prioritize starting families earlier?
I'm so glad you asked that question because under secular Koranism, there would be government marriage bureaus to encourage people to get married and explain gender roles and assess people for marriageability, and there will be remedial marriageability classes and all kinds of things that are intended to make people feel comfortable with the idea of getting married and after purchase support, like what happens when I'm not getting along with my spouse, and there will be matrimonial dispute tribunals and matrimonial appeals tribunals, matrimonial disputes appeal tribunals, and then finally the divorce court. So it will be a structured way of dealing with things, so people won't feel left to themselves.
All right. Well, I guess what about something just economic incentivization? I mean, there have been leaders in countries that incentivized, and you did see booms in babies by incentivizing economic interests, such as marrying and having certain portions of your mortgage be, for example, if you had a house and you had one child, you could have 20% of your mortgage wiped off the account. Two kids, I don't know, 40%. If you had four kids, the house was free. I mean, things like that. And I believe even in Hungary today, they're doing something similar, especially I think if a woman has, chat might be able to help me, 3 to 4 kids, she'll never have to pay tax again. So what about economic incentives?
Well, the economic incentives would be the banning of usury, and this would very significantly lower property prices. Um, and that, I think, would be very attractive to governments and individuals who will then be able to default on their debts if they've already repaid the principal. I know this is a shocking idea, but that's the only way to kind of rebase our currency and everything. Another shocking thing, I suppose, would be the end of equal pay, because I think in order for women to find men attractive, they have to be able to support the woman and any children coming along. And the idea of the family wage would have to return. And this will mean the end of equal pay for women.
Okay, I want to just go back on something you said in the end of usury, and that's a very probably one of the biggest things I think we've even discussed, even though we've discussed whippings, floggings, slavery, sex slavery, beheadings. We've got a long way on this conversation, but usury. Now, one of the things is that most people aren't aware is that our governments don't have direct control over our money supply. And it is in every country I know of. You have private banks. The Federal Reserve are private bankers that own it and are the issuers of our currency, and then basically create money out of nothing and then charge people interest to use it. Now, how would the abolishment of usury take place? Because if you have these private banks that still run the financial system, why would they have any incentive whatsoever to loan people money? Would you then say you'd have to have the government take over the issuance of currency again?
Well, there are already financial instruments in Islam to deal with, lending money. I mean, there's actually a verse about loan agreements and women witnessing them. So,
Well,
commerce.
Christians also banned usury, and it was another group that had to take on the role of the bankers in Europe, because they didn't have the theological compunction against the usury. But sorry, please go ahead.
Really, we have to remember that Martin Luther was dead against usury, and he was immovable on the subject. It was only when John Calvin came along and went to Geneva, and I guess, he was really the one who said, a little usury will do us no harm. It's not usury if the interest rates are low.
Right.
But we know what's happened after that.
Okay. What would you say to people, and I've seen this critique in the chat several times, is that why would people subscribe to Koranism of any kind, given the sort of failed states that people that adhere to it have created? I mean, these states, your country, Malaysia, is probably the most successful, other than ones that are able to extract oil, like in the Gulf states. But then again, they have armies of slaves from India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, building their little kingdoms in the desert. How would you respond to people that basically with their own eyes see that the countries that subscribe to Koranism of any kind simply are either failed states or are pretty much immune to developing.
Well, I would point to Iran and say the Iranians got their country back with Islam, because before that it was the Shah who was a puppet of the West. So I don't think they're backward people, and they seem to be able to have their own foreign policy and defy the might of America. So I don't think that they're doing too badly. I mean, there are only, what, 3 countries allowed to have an independent foreign policy in the global empire of America, and that would be China, Russia, and Iran. Only those 3.
Probably North Korea too.
Oh yes.
Yeah, okay, but Iran, I would say is a not the best example for 2 reasons. They are the cultural inheritors of the Persian Empire, which, for all intents and purposes, was one of the longest and most cultured and one of the biggest empires. I mean, with just incredible cultural output, and they are the effective inheritors. And I believe that this is probably why they also, and they're one of the, I think they're the largest, but they're one of the very, I think the only, other than, pockets of minorities in other Islamic countries, are the only Shia Islamic country, right? So they're the only majority Shia Islamic country. And as far as I can tell, Shia Islam, it doesn't seem as it seems to have more latitude in the way it comes to looking at things rather than Sunni Islam. But I don't know if I would say that the Iranians got their country back by becoming a theocracy. Yes, they do have a democracy. Yes, I mean, it is something that people don't really understand. In their parliament, they actually have Jewish members. They're not some frothing at the mouth group of people that the Western media tries to make them, or they're actually a very cultured and very, very, they have a very, very long legacy as a people. And I'm just seeing in the chat from Frederick, he's saying Turkey is often overlooked. Yeah, Turkey as well. I've been in Turkey a few times over the last year. The last time I was there was back in, I think, February. And I actually lived in Turkey as a young man for about a year. And Turkey is, that is a great country as well. Again, it's not ethnically Arab, it's ethnically Turk. They have, as far as I could tell, they don't have great relations with the other Islamic countries, because a lot of the Islamic countries in their neighborhood, they see them as pretty much trying to regain their position as head of the sort of Ottoman Empire. And it's the same thing as you have over in Asia. You have the squabbling between the different countries, and it is what it is. Okay, Claire, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. Let's see. Okay, so what role and how would secular Koranism, or how would they address cultural factors that are very, it would seem, in the modern West, very important, things like individualism, right? Because you are talking about a completely different sort of piece of work here.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I guess you're asking me what liberties should we fear will be extinguished by secular
Exactly.
Koranism.
Especially like the individualistic nature of Western people.
Well, I don't think that would be extinguished at all. I mean, I think what people most fear is their sexual liberation. But I actually say that gay people have nothing to fear from secular Koranism, though it would have to abolish gay marriage. But if they're not caught,
what about civil
partnerships?
Civil partnerships.
Civil partnerships are basically, a gay marriage. What I would encourage is the idea of the domestic partnership. So people can, share a home and, have shares in it and have rights over each other.
Or for example, pensions or inheritance, these sorts of things.
Well, I mean, it would go back to the husband being responsible for the wife.
No, but we're talking gay marriage. So like say two men or two women. So for example, if they jointly buy a house together and one of them passes away, would they have inheritance, or would they be able to, gain through pensions if one of the husbands or one of the wives dies? Would they be able to receive the pension of the other?
Um, for the property, I mean, you could have a will that says, whoever dies first, the survivor inherits everything. You could have such a system. There would be no inheritance tax. I should mention that, because it would be Islamic rules of inheritance. So wealthier people might be happy about that, because inheritance tax starts at 40% in the UK. There would be no pensions for gay couples because of the abolition of gay marriage, but there'd be no problem with same-sex people owning a property and bequeathing it to the survivor when the first one goes.
Well, I would understand that. You were also saying that you'd have no problem with certain aspects of the individual nature of Western people, but if our democracy, which I honestly think it's a failed system. It doesn't. It's not something that's working anymore. It's something that's not. I don't know. I just don't believe that it has any. I mean, anyone who can see with eyes to see and a brain to think, there's just nowhere in the Western world where you can even look at the supposed democratic process and believe that it's actually functioning. And even Greek philosophers going back 2,000 years would say, all of these democratic systems, especially now that we've enfranchised absolutely everyone, especially people with no skin in the game. That we've enfranchised people that have no skin in the game. And in the UK, I believe I was reading that they're talking about reducing the age, of voting to 16. Is that correct?
Well, apparently not enough stupid people are voting, and they're trying to create a
Yeah,
new class of
but
stupid
16.
people who don't pay any
Are you
taxes.
even allowed to drive at 16 in the UK? You're certainly
Well, you're
not.
allowed to have sex and marry with your parents' permission, but
But
I mean,
all
it's so
right. Well,
clear what they're trying to do.
I mean, it just seems ludicrous having 16-year-olds voting. I mean, all you'd have to do is get their favorite drill rapper. You pay him some money, and he just goes, "Oh, vote Starmer, yo yo yo," and they go, "Okay, we're gonna do that." So yeah, it sounds good. Okay, well, it's been really good having you on here, Claire. And I wanted to say thank you first and foremost for being here. Is there anything you'd like to sort of talk about or address that hasn't been addressed in the conversation that we've had thus far? And is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with? And it's good. We've had a good audience. I've got this on 2 YouTube channels, X. I've got it on D Live, Rumble, and we're at a total audience of over 1,000 people. So that's quite
wow.
good. Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Felix. And
no, it's fine. But is there anything you'd like to discuss that we haven't touched upon so far?
I hope I managed to convey that I'm not some sort of prude. I do understand that most Westerners are sex offenders, really, and I was not a virgin bride. So I like to think that my standards are conveniently low, and there's no need to be frightened about it, because I've been living in the West, and I understand how most Westerners think, but I think unless we start taking marriage seriously again, things will just go from bad to worse, because marriage is in fact eugenic in that it makes us think carefully about who we're going to be having sex and children with in the long term, and the idea is that we should only choose once and make it for keeps in order to keep the world reasonably stable and reasonably sensible. And this is really what I'm trying to restore. Not just in the West, because everybody's going crazy in other parts of the world as well.
All right.
And
So, but choosing once. But if you're a Muslim, you can choose Muslim men. You can't choose 4 times and have an unlimited number of female sex slaves, though, right? As we discussed.
well, I mean, you can go to your licensed brothel in your red light district, and
Okay, but you can't keep them in your home anymore. That's all right. One last question: why not study secular biblicalism rather than
no,
Koranism?
you don't want that. The 36 capital offenses in the Torah. And
Okay,
and
what about
idolatry and
secular
blasphemy and adultery and
Christianity?
sodomy.
How about just taking the New Testament rather?
Well, the problem with the New Testament is that it says nothing clearly, and there is no unity of authorship. It's written by some guys called, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, and Thomas Jefferson did his. Created the Jefferson Bible when he basically left out the Pauline epistles, because basically Paul never met Jesus and he made up Christianity as we now know it, and quite a few people have a problem with that. So that is really the problem. I mean, if you read the New Testament, you won't be able to find any clear set of principles that you can say, these are Christian principles. And if you say the 10 Commandments, the Jews would say, well, they're ours.
Well, talking about Paul, and I don't want to get into it because I'm trying to exit here. If anybody's interested, Paul. In my mind, I read a great book on him. It was called Paul the Apostle by J.D. Unwin. Oh, it's not J.D. Unwin. A.N. Wilson, excuse me. J.D. Unwin's a completely different author. A.N. Wilson, like A dot
Andrew
N dot
yes,
Wilson.
Yes.
Wilson, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's written a lot of really good biographies. I read one of his on Jesus as well. And whatever Paul was, he was a religious genius. So his mind, just getting into it, I would suggest anyone who's is at all interested in the history of Christianity, Christian theology, A.N. Wilson, Paul the Apostle. It's probably one of the better books that I've read in a long time. Okay, well, with that, Claire, anything else that you want to say? Is there? Oh, you should probably give your social medias and where people can find you and all of that jazz.
Thank you for the book recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't aware of his book. You can find me on Linktree under Secular Koranism, and I'll have a whole list of my my book and that blog that I mentioned, and my different social media accounts. So please go there.
So can I confirm? So it's linktree.com/secular Koranism. That's where people can find you.
Yes.
Okay.
And yes, and please keep the questions coming. I do enjoy intelligent, difficult questions, and I hope to be hearing from you. And thank you again, Felix, for this wonderful opportunity to be on your show.
No worries, Claire.
Audience.
I enjoy our conversations. I mean, I should say to everyone who just arrived, Claire and I actually do know each other. We've met in London several times. We've gone to many sort of dinner parties together. So it's not like I don't know Claire. I know you, for years now. I should say, as we wrap it up, I'm going to be doing one of these per week, an interview with a different person per week. The next interview will be with Ethan Ralph. And for those of you not aware, Ethan Ralph is a podcaster at the Kill Stream. I'm going to be on his show tomorrow at the same time as this right now, but we're going to be having him on my channel next week. So because he's never been on my channel. I've been on his podcast, the Kill Stream, many times. So this is like a new sort of thing on my channel, just for people to have interviews with very different kinds of people. So we're having one today with Claire on secular Koranism, And next week it's going to be with Ethan Ralph on internet drama and the life created around internet drama. So it should be interesting. Okay, Claire. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. It's been definitely a pleasure. I'm glad that we finally were able to get this done. Sorry that it's taken as long as it has. Yeah, sorry. I mean, it's just
yes. No.
All right.
I'm glad to be finally on your show, and I'll be watching you and Ethan Ralph, and
Okay. I will have you on again. You know, I'm sure people would like to hear more about secular Koranism, I would imagine. So it'll be interesting. All right. So thanks again, Claire, and everyone who's been watching, almost 1,000 people across all platforms. That's great. I really much appreciate it. We will be talking to you. I'll have a new video out. I've got a new video out that I put out last night, and I'll have another video put out tomorrow morning, Eastern Standard Time, around 9 a.m., talking about the absolute capitulation of Europe economically to the United States in the recent trade deal, and how basically Ursula von der Leyen, the EU's Commission's president, the unelected, I should say, how she basically not only took, you know, America asked her to take a bite of a fecal sandwich. She didn't do that. Fecal matter sandwich. I'm trying to keep my language clean. You know, the United States said, here, take a bite of this fecal matter sandwich. And she said, oh, she just gobbled it and said, I'll have another, please. She's basically causing untold damage to what is left of the European economy. That will be out tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 a.m. Pacific. So it'll be there when you guys wake up in the US. For those of you in the UK, just that's 5 hours later, so 2 p.m. And that's about 10 p.m. In the Orient. So Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, that sort of thing. And I guess in Australia, that'd be about 11. Depending on where you are. In Perth, it'd probably be like 9. If you're in Sydney, it'll be like maybe 11. So that's coming out 9 a.m. tomorrow. I've got a couple other things in the couple other irons in the fire. But yeah, all right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Claire, again, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for being here. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.